Following what we discussed this afternoon, that immediate rescuing situation which inspired the practitioner into first step of devotion. And devotion on the basis of general need, basic need, rather than any particular logical conclusion in terms of the intellect, which brings to the second stage where that person is rescued already. That there is a sense of even resentment to the rescuer in some part. That to the extreme that sometimes we feel that somebody is minding our business or undermine our dignity, although at the time that you are helpless. But when you regain your strength or hypocrisy, that such devotion then to subside. And often people forget the kindness and the generous and the compassionate gestures that the rescuer had performed. It seems that the second stage of devotion is have to come from a sense of discovering a friend rather than a teacher. The Hinayana's approach to devotion is very much of a teacher, guru. And the Mahayana's approach of devotion is relating to a friend. And it is known as the Kalyana Mitra, which means spiritual friend. And some sense of friendship seems to be necessary. And that particular friend is also at the same time heavy-handed friend who minds your business nevertheless. But at the same time, this person is a friend. So we could say the first part of the devotion of the Hinayana approach is the patient and doctor relationship type. That you may not prove of such physician, but you have to have someone to cure you. And when you recovered, you still might resentful of your physician. And next situation is a friend, spiritual friend. To whom that we should communicate, but In this case, the reason why it is referred as a friend rather than master is that a sense of equal communication, to the fact that you don't feel that you are wretched, stupid, unworthy person with a dirty vessel in which that you hope to receive the precious elixir of life as a portion of highly powered spiritual medicine. And if we have such attitude that we are completely inadequate, then what we receive will be also inadequate, because we are unable to hold it. So therefore the very notion of equal relationship, eye-level relationship, is important. You are, up to a certain point, a worthy person and a capable person to receive such teaching. In other words, that there is a sense of one's own inspiration, insight, pain, neurosis, and all of those are included in your basic makeup as a good vessel. That your neurosis and pain are not regarded as bad, or for that matter your particular good qualities are regarded as extraordinarily good, but those things are the substance that the vessel is made out of. So there's a sense of overall trust in oneself. And the devotion at this point is not only devotion to the object of devotion alone, but a sense of devotion in oneself. That there is a certain amount of trust in oneself to begin with. In which case, trust means this point, sense of warmth to oneself, compassion to oneself. In other words, absence of aggression, which is the Bodhisattva path, is absence of aggression, which plays an important part, extremely important part. In other words, our approach to ourselves, either too extremely arrogant or extremely negative, that both of those vessels are unsuitable. That arrogant student is like a pot or container turned upside down, and depressed student is like a container with holes in them. So in any case, I'm not suggesting that before we receive teaching from a teacher, make a relationship with a spiritual friend, that we should become a perfectly ideal person, which is asking impossible. But some glimpse of general attitude, occasional attitude, if there's a seed of positive attitude to oneself, absence of arrogant pride, then there's a possibility so that your spiritual friend can communicate according with those glimpses of suitable situation that occurred in your state of being. So let's discuss them in detail. By example, in terms of depression is concerned, that a sense of that you being unsuitable person to receive teaching, but nevertheless you have hope, tremendous hope about the whole thing. And when person enters into a spiritual path, the traditional, conventional idea of spiritual path is to make yourself a good person, without any fault, none whatsoever. So when you begin to find that you have faults of all kinds, that you automatically feel that you're being, your journey has been delayed, and your perfection is being challenged. So one begin to cut down oneself and even willing to go through all kinds of disciplines as to punish your body and to punish your mind by imposing all kinds of rules, disciplines, inflicting pain on oneself. So far as to the asking possible magic that might cure your shortcomings. Since you can't handle yourself from realistically, someone is asking for all kinds of magical cure. That seems to be, we are falling in the pitfall of spiritual materialism again. It's not questionable that the person who receive, before they receive teachings, they should become absolutely ideal vessel as such necessarily. But a person should become a balanced vessel with a balanced state of being, state of mind. So the negative attitude to oneself is either one gets extraordinarily depressed about one's abilities to receive the teachings and panicking all kinds of little happenings, little disturbance that comes out to oneself, panicking them as bad news, that you have no hope. The problem here is judging oneself too much. The other one is in terms of arrogant student who cannot have a devotion, real devotion, is that person has received some glimpse of the teachings. Some are basically cured of that preliminary sanity is developed in oneself. And then one is questioning oneself in terms of taking the liberty that I can handle myself. I do not need a friend to communicate. And once is trusting too much in one's own homebrewed potion. Trusting too much in homemade things that You have built yourself up to this point. I have built myself up to this point. And I had achieved all kinds of things that I wanted to achieve. And I'm sure that I don't have to go through this embarrassment of even regarding somebody as my personal friend anymore. I can get the appropriate books, or I can brew the appropriate medicine to cure myself. For example, I used to know a friend whose friend had decided to open his third eye, and he was a dentist. He has appropriate tools. He drew himself literally in the forehead, made a big little hole, and there was an eye behind the skull. People do talk about, particularly Buddhism, as being a do-it-yourself religion, and salvation is to yourself, and nobody, no help getting from outside, and no magic from that point of view. But in this point of view, it's not a question of asking external magical powers or divine powers could influence you, but Buddhism highly recommends that you do need external friend who might still say the same thing, that do it yourself is the best way, but you have to have someone to encourage you to do that, to show you that somebody else done it, the friend himself did it, and his previous friends of the lineage has done it as well. So you have to have some kind of proof, to the point that this whole thing is not a gigantic hoax, but it's a real thing, and somebody to pass on the message or the techniques and so forth. It's necessary to have external friend who's a human being, quite possible to have some basic understanding of your psychology, even if the friend doesn't have a complete understanding of your cultural differences or whatever, but some understanding of you as a human being seems to be necessary, absolutely necessary. Otherwise, that we are unable to receive anything, any real teachings or real benefit, that we become a container turned upside down. We have no way of being generous, opening. And at the same point that you might find rather contradictory to this thing, to what I've been saying already, is that there should be some sense of hopelessness. That devotion, real devotion, can come about if there's a sense of real trust in oneself, complete trust in oneself. Complete trust in oneself, and also at the same time not becoming too ambitious. Because you have a complete trust in yourself, therefore you can do anything you like. But complete trust means just a balanced state of trust in oneself, in one's well-being. That you are not subject to extreme neurosis, either condemning oneself or being absolutely arrogant. So that is the just basic sanity, ordinary sanity, basic sanity. That is, in other words, a step towards being an ordinary person, ordinary intelligent human being. And beyond that, that human being shouldn't become too ambitious in terms of building up his dreams. Or exercising out the person's dream should be manufactured in a real world, which is recreating hope. So sense of hopelessness seems to play an extremely important part here. But when we use the word hopeless, we don't necessarily mean hopeless in the sense of desperation. But giving up hope in this case is not manufacturing further unnecessary expectations. So hopelessness equals to without expectations. Expecting that good fortunes will come to you. It's like inside of fortune cookies. Possibly there will be chaos. Possibly there is development, creativity. Those both situations are a great possibility. But predominantly that you are not looking ahead, but you are looking direct in front of you rather than looking ahead in the distance. That is the way of communicating with a spiritual friend. The spiritual friend does not live as a future dream. Like arranged marriage. But a spiritual friend lives right there, in front of you, 6 inches away. Right there. That's why spiritual friend is referred to as heavy-handed, minding your business person. He is a good spiritual friend. Whereas if spiritual friend is shy of himself or you, then spiritual friend will be a yard away from you. Either he's shy of you or himself, whatever. The devotion to the spiritual friend is comparable to a sense of trust in yourself. The spiritual friend is act as a speedometer, a mirror, that you bounce back to it, and that vision bounce back on you. And in fact, in the Mahayana tradition, you can't trot on the path of Mahayana without a spiritual friend. Absolutely not. Because you have to have the receive the good news of the Bodhisattva's wide open path. That great Bodhisattvas in the past who had achieved what they wanted to achieve, and they have accomplished a great deal. And so that you, as future Bodhisattvas, also should know that teaching, that practice as a real thing, rather than purely myth, purely level of blind faith in this case. So sense of that, one of the problems is that the reason why we look for magic and miracles are that because we don't believe what we be told. We want to have some proof. And we are so bored living on this earth. We want to go out to the moon, the Mars, explore the other solar systems. And we find this place is too small, polluted or unclean. That seems to be the problem, that we have a problem of a sense of unable to contain ourselves and not able to appreciate the little things as much as the bigger things. Little things are as important as bigger things. That little relationship that we involve with a spiritual friend who does not perform miracles, magics, but who also brings the proof that that person, spiritual friend, is also belongs to a lineage of lines and lines of generations of people who had done something and has real proof as an example. So learning how to be a good baker, that your previous teachers in the art of bread making has baked their bread, and the message and information has been handed down generations and generations. So your present teacher also bakes good bread and feeds you. The taste of good bread is made by him. The actual loaf of bread that he gives you as a sample is made by himself. It wasn't nursed as antique pieces handed down generations. But it is example of what freshness could be, as knowledge that handed down. So somehow we can make connections that generations in the past also made a similar good bread. And that is a spiritual friend who has real living teaching, and you can relate with this person thoroughly and completely, either not condemning yourself or boost up your ego to relate with this person, but direct, simple, ordinary, simple and straightforward. That is devotion. Then you begin to develop, instead of blind faith, some sense of real devotion, real faith, if you like to call it. Faith in the sense of that there is something happening. There is something that is workable, something that is fantastic. But at the same time not expecting anything extraordinary. The relationship of the spiritual friend is day-to-day living situation, everyday communication. We have a problem there with the first part of the devotion thing. We discussed this earlier part of this morning, this afternoon. And what we're discussing now is how to build a gap from the being rescued to difference between rescuer or doctor to a spiritual friend. I think in the case of a physician or rescuer, that there wasn't very much room to make friends, because you're already in the emergency room. You hardly even talk. And even you can't sign your own name, your relatives or your friends have to sign and that this person is had to be operated. And at that point, there's no point in trying to talk to extreme case person to make it reasonable, introducing doctor's name or what's your name. There's no point in trying to be polite at that point. It's emergency situation. But you'll be thrust or pushed into that situation. After you got the operation, you gone through operation, and you had recovered from your sickness and everything. And then there's a possibility that the person who performed the operation has further interest in you, because that person has learned a great deal about you while performing the operation. The nature of your sickness and the way of your state of being, state of mind, and so forth. And that person is also liking you tremendously. And the reason why you're resentful about that person is because that person is being taken interest in you after your initial recovery or for your emergency situations. You want to give away completely, you want to go away. You don't want to be intimidated by repeating your case history to you. And that's the level which is very difficult to click, but actually absolutely necessary. It is unlike the ordinary medical practices in which that the doctors could transfer their case history to you, your case history to somebody else, and somebody else could take over if you have prolonged sickness. But in this case, it is a real operation in a personal sense. There is somebody that you happen to run into as an emergency situation had to carry you out until real fundamental basic sanity had developed completely. So at that point, the sense of surrendering is very important. That your explosion, that you have to show this physician your private parts, and you're so ashamed of it afterwards. But still this physician is keeping calm and quiet and liking you nevertheless. how your private parts and your sickness may be, how repulsive it may be, but this person is taking liking you. And at that point, sense of surrendering seems to be extremely important, that you have made the greatest gift to your physician, is exposing yourself. So the relationship had to continue, rather than jumping back and forth to different physicians. It seems the nature of the operation and the sickness is entirely different from the ordinary ones, ordinary conventional, ordinary medical situations, opposed to psychological situations at this point. We could have discussions on that thing.
You mentioned ordinary, or rather everyday communication. How does that work in a case like this where you may speak to a student only once in 6 months or so? How does the communication go back and forth?
What do you mean, how?
What's the mechanics of the communication? I could see possibly how a student could communicate with you in your absence.
You okay?
But I don't see, in a sense of opening himself up. But I don't see how it goes back and forth.
What do you think? Do you have any suggestions?
I suggest you use a different word other than everyday communication, because I just don't see how it applies.
Every monthly? Annual?
Well, I would a different word than communication. I don't see what you're getting at. In is there some like go-between? Is the Hail the Tiger is a living situation? Sort of act as a catalyst for that, so that it does go on in an everyday way?
Well, you see, communication, in this case, means real communication, rather than communication in the sense of that you're talking me, I'm talking you, constant non-stopping. And communication doesn't mean to say develop a big mouth.
Well, what does it
mean? Communication needs also time to communicate. That I'm not trying to justify that my busy schedule has not permitted people to talk to, but it seems it is good and necessary that the people have a sense of thinking out for themselves and relating to the situations and communicating to your teacher, because then what you communicate becomes more worthwhile. You don't constantly communicate to your spiritual friend which days will be best day to have a haircut.
So then the everyday kind of communication, like a Zen master who lives with his 10 students and he works and eats with them and has tea with them daily, is a kind of a hindrance to the communication?
It depends on who is the student.
Well, say 10 people at random, for example. Is one better than the other, or does it just depend on like the teacher's preference?
I think in the Zen master's relationship with his student in Japan is ideal, because they have their teacher. Their living situation is not extraordinary. It's just a simple existence. But in this country, maybe we have a problem about that, even that as well. And I can understand why Suzuki Roshi doesn't go up to Tassajara too often. I thought that was very wise.
Where does devotion end and dependence start? What are the qualities of the two?
Independence. Did you say independence?
Dependence.
Dependence, yeah. Dependence is addiction.
Yeah.
And devotion is medical care.
Sometimes that leads to addiction,
Hmm?
Sometimes that leads to addiction.
Well, to a lot of people, that you have a medicine because of for your health, and then at some point it becomes addictive. That you fail to relate with your body, and the bodily metabolism doesn't fight against the sickness that you are subject to, and purely relies on the drugs that be imposed on you.
Still there.
You caught it.
There it is.
Emergency situation. It sounds as though you're warning, on the one hand, against the dangers of too much independence. Your example of the dentist who bored in his own forehead for his third eye. And on the other hand, warning against the dangers of too much dependence. Are you saying that devotion must be a sort of a moderate middle path between these two extremes in relation?
Well, I think the question is, if there's a really strong relationship with a spiritual friend, and that spiritual friend takes care of a certain amount of it, but at the same time that person had to be prepared for, or spiritual friend who might desert you at some point for your own good. So you should be prepared for it. See what I mean? That it's not so much that you're moderating and thinking about that all the time, but real communication with a spiritual friend is you're communicating to yourself at the same time. So there will be a sense of expecting that relating with a spiritual friend is not eternal relationship, but it is a relationship that exists within your own conditions. That final object is that you become a completely independent person, that you can function without anybody else to relate to.
Couldn't that preparation for your, standing on your own, develop almost into a sort of a paranoid attitude that would cut off communication to your spiritual friend? I mean, if you're always worrying about the rug being pulled out from under you, or being dropped, so to speak, wouldn't that kind of make you overcautious, or?
I don't think so. Being overcautious also depends on the security at the same time.
Trying to maintain something.
Yeah, otherwise you can't be cautious.
There's nothing to maintain.
Yeah. So when you're being careful about the whole thing, which means you are securing when the rug is pulled under your feet, you don't make a big landing.
Am I correct in interpreting what you're saying as similar to an analyst who goes through the woods with the patient, in the patient's woods, and merely accompanies them and points the direction that this might happen if you did this, but doesn't tell them what to do?
Woods or woods?
Woods.
Woods, trees, jungle. I'm sorry you have to say it again. I didn't quite catch it.
Am I correct in interpreting similar to an analyst who goes through the patient's forest where the patient is lost with the patient and points possibilities of what might happen if they went this way or that way, but the patient has to choose their own way. But the analyst keeps the patient company.
I think it's something more than that. Actually, for the very fact that analyst and patient relationship are business deal in the conventional sense, that spiritual friend and student relationship is not entirely business deal. It's something more than that. That spiritual friend might show you the possible pitfalls of all kinds, but at the same time, until you can handle yourself, the spiritual friend will kidnap you, mind your business, so that you don't just completely do your own freestyle. So there is that's what I mean is minding your business is that point is that there's some sense of a less business deal and more humane, if you say such thing, could say such thing. It's that spiritual friend is semi-parent in some way.
The spiritual friend relationship that you're talking about started out with a crisis situation. Is that necessary?
It seems to be necessary somewhat. I wouldn't say dramatically crisis situation, but at least some kind of irregularity. You say something?
Yeah. In hospitals, they have something they call the intensive care unit. When somebody actually comes in on an emergency, given 24-hour care of a very intense kind, and this sort of problem, I think, interests us who are trying to struggle with a feeble dharmadhatu on a very practical level, because we run up against the problem, of course, that for many of the people who come into the dharmadhatu, you exist as one teacher on magnetic tape. You see, so in a sense, you're not there intensively for those people who might be able to make the connection as if you were. Now, I don't see the answer to this problem. It seems to me insoluble. But I'd like to know what you think about it.
I think it's a question of that if there is real emergency situations, that situation could be obviously beyond time and space situation. You know, that time and space doesn't matter if there's a real oppressive situation of people really needing help. Whereas if it's a second phase in which that you have to make yourself available to a spiritual friend, and that's in their own. So basically, as a reference point, everybody is Dharmadhatus started as secondary phase of devotion process. And they are not regarded as a place for emergency room. The emergency rooms probably exist in here or Karma Zone. And these places are recovery places. They go back to their recuperation and they work on their own. Or, I mean, we could have a retreat situation. It could be said as extensive care. And that had to be, they have to be willing to go it.
So if somebody's really hungry for the Dharma, we send them down here.
Yeah, you bet.
When you're here.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's why we're here, and that's why the locations be set up that way as well.
When you say that a healthy attitude is one of hopelessness without expectations, how do you work in the whole idea of dreams, of fantasy, of creativity, of taking new directions without expectations? How does that work with...
New directions, did you say?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's question of taking directions. It doesn't have to become a. You have to become futuristic. You could be right there, and you can take new directions according to what is there, rather than what might happen to you in the future terms. So new direction is right there, and it's question of choosing the stepping stones, which will be obvious if you don't deceive yourself, or if you are have a highly complicated mind, then obviously that you are confused. But even those confusions could be worked out in terms of obvious outstanding stepping stones that there is.
When you were talking about people having full trust in themselves, and you're talking about not having great expectations for the future, would you say that would be the same thing as humility? Full trust in yourself with humility?
Yeah, with dignity of some kind, rather than just humility in a sense of a depressive level.
No, I just
Yeah, but a sense of dignity, yeah, definitely, yeah.
In Buddhist meditation, since you're constantly thrown back on your own self-reliance, sometimes a sort of bravado can develop that you think you don't need any outside help. What's a good method of not falling into the trap of using meditation in the service of the ego?
Well, that's precisely the idea of spiritual materialism, is you're falling into spiritual materialism, that point. But if the meditation doesn't serve pleasurable situations for you, then in the Buddhist meditation throughout the practices developed throughout history, is that meditation tends to bring you out. Your neurosis brings out on the surface constantly. So therefore you begin to rediscover yourself constantly. And I don't see any problems with that. Any other problem is that if a meditation is purely a pleasurable situation that you should go into, and that feeds you again and again, sort of seduction level, sedative level. Otherwise there's no problem.
When you begin to become aware of yourself, perhaps through the idea of someone as a mirror, the idea of dignity becomes difficult in that sense. You have dignity because you always feel thrown back on who you are. Things become sort of painfully obvious in that sense. And how is it possible to have dignity at that same time?
Dignity when you are thrown back?
When you can see that there's no way to do anything right, as it were, and you can't do nothing at all.
Well, you see, that's the point. That's the whole point. You can't develop dignity at that point. It's because what's being happening, the chaotic situation that around you, are not particularly regarded as a destructive situation, but it is a challenging situation. Those are messages. Those are constant messages. This learning situation, like if you can't spell in first grade and teachers correcting you, which doesn't mean to say that teachers are trying to destroy you, but the teacher is trying to teach you something. So each word could be spelled properly. It's a new challenge, a new stepping stone, rather than that message is, that you are no good. I mean, that's a very important attitude to take, is that any kind of challenge that comes up is a message, because it's not predominantly destructive, but it's creative, because it gives you opportunity to work on it, work with it.
So even though you're not necessarily enjoying it, you keep playing ball with it at the same time.
So to speak, yeah.
Couldn't it get oppressive? Couldn't it get oppressive? The situation arise where you just never seem to win the ball game.
Well, it seems that up to this point nobody has really tried properly as part of the path. So we do not know really. So it's up to you to experiment with it and see what happens. But I doubt it will be absolutely boring. But on the other hand, it doesn't become really pleasurable as such at all.
Ever? It never becomes pleasurable?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there's all possibilities. And the attitude we are taking tonight here seems to be rather extreme.
It could become pleasurable.
It could be, it could become absolutely depressive, yeah.
Rinpoche, getting back to the idea of everyday communication, wouldn't you admit that the idea of a spiritual friend with 5,000 followers is a situation peculiar to the establishment of Dharma in the West and not really an ideal situation?
Sorry, I didn't listen to you.
A spiritual friend with 5,000 followers is something you don't see in India, or the guru-disciple relationship isn't something that generally is a situation involving a spiritual friend with 5,000 followers, or whatever large number. At any rate, wouldn't you think that that is far from an ideal situation?
It could be far from ideal situation, but also it depends on that the style of communication takes place. We can't give, Guru Maharaji is collecting millions of followers, therefore he is unable to handle the whole thing, or such like situation. We can't just block out by we can't condemn according to the newsreel, so to speak. But I think each situation has a unique way of handling the whole thing. So I think there is some workable situation, and that is to say that we are taking the example of a Buddha. That he is supposed to give a discourse, and something like 10,000 become arahats, and 12,000 become awakened, and 3,000 become this and that. And there's that possibility of some personal something. I mean, we have to try. We have to see what happens. And there's no point in just simplifying everything into that heavy personal situation alone, which is a kind of either creating psychodrama or encounter group with a guru, which seems to be the wrong approach as well at the same time. So we have to see what happens.
So when one is communicating with a spiritual friend, then does one want to just completely be oneself and not put up any front or a facade of some kind?
Yeah, that seems to be it.